The other day I was at a shop and I was sitting down going through some of my verses for gave them over. And I was reading in Joshua 10 a story about the kings during the conquest of Canaan and the cave of Makeda. And there were 5 kings that were trapped. And the guy happened to be a police officer or a law enforcement officer. And we started talking, and he was a fan of the Bible. He saw me reading and he asked me what I was studying. So I told him the story. And it's really what I'm looking for by presenting these things in this Isaiah study, is because I would much rather have a conversation about these things and put God in the center of the conversation than to just speak out and make a video, because this is not about me, because obviously people don't want to be looking at me. Yeah, I'm all about conversing about it. And since this is more like a discipline for me of getting down some ideas, but it was a very pleasant thing to be able to share it with somebody else. So let's get into this. Joshua chapter 10, you have these 5 kings. Here we have right at the conquest of the Canaan's land. This situation that came up was that there were 5 kings that conspired against Israel. And they all took their stand and thought that they had their strength in their confederacy. And Joshua, with the power of the Lord behind them, in front of them, and all around them, came in and captured these kings, put a stone over their cave that they had come to hide in. Then they pull them out of the cave, and they have these 5 kings: the king of Jerusalem, the king of Hebron, the king of Jarmuth, the king of Lachish, and the king of Eglon. And with all the people surrounding and watching this event, these kings that took their stand against Israel, Joshua had them take them out, pull them out, put their feet on their necks. And then Joshua came and ran them through to put an end to their lives. And Joshua announced in front of everybody, this is what the Lord our God will do to all your enemies. He will give them over to you. I want you to notice this, though. This is one of those underneath things. I'll give the name and kind of what it means. So Jerusalem is the name means possession of peace. You hear the word Salem, Shalom is right there at the end. So possession of peace. So if you possess peace, you have security. And so one of the things that God was giving them with this king was he was displaying that God is for them security. The name Hebron, it means a confederation or league. And all these 5 kings coming up against Israel was a confederation. When you think about the way that Joshua pulled them out and their feet on their necks, which is a sign of domination and defeat. When we have our life with God, these are things that will stand in our way. These kings of the earth will pull us away from being interested and having our trust in God. Like, for instance, Jerusalem. If your possession of peace is not based upon God, but is based upon security, like your doorbell camera, your shotgun, whatever makes you secure, then your security is not in the Lord. I'm not saying you won't have those other things too, but if your security is in God or if it's in the things that you try to protect yourself. Hebron, there's a lot of partnerships that people make. It's all about who you know, right? So if we have the human tendency to make partnerships with people, to make friends, and to let that be our strength. So the king of Hebron represents making a confederation and letting that be your what you put your hopes on. Jarmuth, it means height. Being height is it's a representation of pride. So if we have our pride, our mind puts ourselves up higher than it should be. Lachish, it could be fear or obstinacy. So to me, the interpretation is stubbornness. If there is a king of stubbornness in your life, then you refuse to be led, you refuse to be humbled, and so there's all kinds of ways that fear or obstinatation can hold you back from letting go with this life that we have in God. Eglon, this was the tough one. This was kind of a stretch, but I was not in Canaan land, but I understand that some of the traditions and habits that the Canaanites had their calf worship. We saw that in the Exodus when they came out of Egypt. Eglon, the king, his name means the calf place. Just so happens that the name of Makkedah, where the cave was, is called the shepherd's place. So here we have the shepherd's place and the calf's place, and the calf place and the shepherd's place is the one that God showed the dominance, where these kings were put to their end. So with their feet on the neck of these kings, this is what God does to your enemies. In Judges 2, the angel of the Lord came and said, I said to do this, but you didn't do it. I will not drive these people from before you, and they will be a thorn for you. So the New King James has the translation of sold them. On a scale of opposites, faithfulness is on one side, and being a sellout is non-faithfulness. Faithfulness is so relevant in any covenant with God because it is the highest measure. It is the illumination of God's character, and He shares it with us. And when we imitate Him in faithfulness, it is a good relationship. To sell them out is not a character trait that I want to be quick to attribute to God, whose self-identification, which He has declared and has demonstrated to all of us who follow Him through revelation of Scripture and through continued relationship with our present body of witnesses. People are the ones who are the sellouts. Even the best of us have sketchy bios that may have some event where we were sellouts. So to shift gears, going back to the give them over theme, it fits more. Give them over fits more because of the relationship dynamics that God has as the standard. So here the Lord displays some of the conditions that He stated concerning the nations surrounding Israel. They could just as easily been chased out or eradicated, but the people of Israel had not agreed to that. So to demonstrate this assertion, they flirted around with the pagan gods. So you can't desire to get rid of the people with whom you honor the same God. So God's servant told them, the same people who were supposed to be your enemies to eradicate, You befriended them by accepting their gods. But they are not your friends. They will become to you like thorns, and that can be nothing but a nuisance. Cause pain, and you won't be able to get rid of them. So the presence of the people with loyalty to false gods will serve a dual duty. So the first one is a reminder of a time when our fidelity towards our rescuer and strength faltered, and we gave away our allegiance to another god. So the second duty is that they are to serve as a test. Not unlike the test that Satan gave at the garden, something like, do you really think that there's only one God? You don't have to follow just the one, do you? What kind of God would make you want to rule out all the possibilities of the other gods? End quote. And so in this place, in Judges, the people of God, they begin to live out a cycle of failure, repentance, rescue, and then restoration. And it was cyclical, often repeated. I grew up in a tradition whose view of the Old Testament came across as, boy, were those Israelites dumb. They saw God working and just disregarded him right to his face, without regard that we ourselves are the Israelites and the Israelites are us. It is easier to put distance between you and the people that you judge by focusing on the differences rather than the similarities, especially if similarities make us look bad. So in the patterns that we may be more merciful to others if we realize that their patterns of disobedience are our patterns of disobedience too. Will these patterns ever end? Are we in a cycle that continually repeats itself as well? So when the Lord sets us free, not only can he free us from the grip of the enemy, but he can give us freedom from the patterns that put us into self-inflicted misery in the first place. Yes, gave them over can be a dismal idea, if it were not for the salvation that God gives us from our enemies without and the enemies within, and this through trusting and giving your own self over to Yeshua the Messiah. Psalm 81:12 says, "So I gave them over to their stubborn hearts to follow their own counsels." So, if Messiah is not your master, then your master is your stubborn heart, and you follow your own counsel. Now, if you were born in the 20th century, you've experienced a culture that is humanistic by default. So, by culture, you may be conditioned to think, well, who better to give counsel than myself? In a culture that in the first quarter of the 21st century has witnessed the fruit of self-informed hedonism, that you can pick whatever you want, is unmoored from a morality and civic law that God prescribed through the Torah, reemphasizes through the prophets, and then perfected in Messiah. A standard arriving from the outside of our humanity is the only thing that can save us even from ourselves. So the standard does not mean a bunch of rules to follow, but the dynamic relationship that defies explanation. Psalm 118:18. The Lord has disciplined me severely, but he has not given me over to death. Verse 17. I shall not die, but I shall live and recount the deeds of the Lord. 2 Thessalonians 2:9-11. So we're jumping testaments here, but the idea is still the same. The coming of the lawless one is by the activity of Satan, with all power and false signs and wonders, and with all wicked deception for those who are perishing, because they refuse to love the truth and to be saved. Therefore God sends them a strong delusion, so that they may believe what is false, in order that all may be condemned, who did not believe the truth, but had pleasure in unrighteousness. And then in Romans 2 is probably one of the biggest ones of giving them over. The bottom line of give them over, whichever book you're consulting, is that there is that tension there, and giving people over to their own desires is a tool that allows us as humans to see how far down we can go. And if you've ever been in a depth, you know how far you can go. And you know that when you get to the bottom of your depths, that there's only one thing to do, and that is to reach up. And when we reach up, we call out to God. And that is the only thing that's going to get you out of that hole once you've been given over. And I think life is a balance of thinking that you got this handled and then learning that you don't. And one of the wonderful things about walking with the Lord is that you know where the good comes from, and you know where your protection comes from. You know where your spirit comes from. You know where all the things that you might know come from. It comes from the Lord. It comes from being taught by God. And this is the goodness of life. We're going to be shifting into other topics in Isaiah coming up very soon. The one about gave them over, it was kind of dismal, but they're not all dismal. But there is gospel in gave them over and all the rest. But a couple of the ones that are up in the queue, God's glory and God's garden. So stay tuned, and thank you for watching, and hope you're blessed by it.